Welcome back to Z-Speed, and thanks for tuning back in. Today we'll be showing you how to replace your washer motor on a 2000 to 2005 Pontiac Bonneville. And if you turn your wiper blades on and they just won't shut off, I'm going to show you a possible free fix with the original wiper motor. So if you're interested in something like this, just stay tuned. Okay, before we do the install, let's make sure your fuse is not blown. You'd hate to replace a motor when all you had is a blown fuse. Inside the engine bay on the passenger side, you have this small green 30 amp fuse. Check that, make sure it's intact. If it's not, replace it. Your window wiper blades might start working. Or if you're in my situation, I turned the window washer blades on and they would not shut off. You can remove that fuse and stop the blades because you definitely don't want them to scratch the window when it's not raining. Also, if they're still working but won't shut off, you might be able to fix that motor for free. I'll talk more about that later just by cleaning it out. It might be wet inside. That's what was going on with mine. But we'll talk more about that later, and that might be an easy fix for you. Okay, before we get started, we'll kind of give you a plan of attack. We'll be removing this plastic molding that goes along the entire bottom of the windshield. And then obviously we'll be removing both of the wiper blade assemblies. And as far as the motor location itself, it's on the driver's side down in that area right there. We'll be accessing that part to remove the wiper motor itself, okay? So I just want to kind of give you an overview of how we're going to start everything off. We're going to open the hood now and start removing there's a few plastic push pins here and there that we'll have to remove before we can remove anything else. So I'm going to start off by removing this weather stripping from inside the engine bay here. That just keeps water from getting underneath the hood and into the engine bay. And there's some rubber bits on the sides of these panels. This little plastic panel that goes along the bottom of the windshield. There's some little rubber pieces that we're going to just detach from the fender. I just removed the top cover to the cabin air filter right there, and that's very easy to do. So you can see it's kind of loose, and you may need a plastic panel removal tool to actually pull this out. I was able to do it by hand, but have one available because you may or may not be able to get all these by hand. So I had to use a plastic panel removal tool on some of these little plastic bits, but there's a few plastic push pins along the bottom here. So I think there's a total of 5 or 6, and we'll go into that in a second. Over here, there's a couple as well. So I'm going to go ahead now and remove this little rubber piece from the fender right here as well. And like I said, I could just work it loose here, but you might need a plastic panel removal tool. So now we got those loose. We just need to get the push pins, and then we're also going to need to remove the wiper blades as well. So I went ahead and removed the plastic push pins off camera. It was pretty simple, so I'm not going to really show that to save time. Now we're going to go ahead and skip forward to the wiper blade removal for the driver and passenger side. It's pretty straightforward to just remove that cap right there on the very end with a flathead screwdriver, and that little cap keeps debris and water out of the little area around the nuts so it doesn't get rusty. So now I've removed the cap and now have clear access to this nut. It's a 13 millimeter nut right here, and I used an extended socket to break it loose. Didn't have a lot of torque involved here, so it was pretty simple to break loose. So you're not going to have to worry about that. Now the difficulty was actually removing the wiper blade itself. They had been on there for quite a long time. This is a 2001 Pontiac Bonneville, so this thing's pretty old, so I had to actually use a rubber mallet to tap on the post to get it to break loose. But it wasn't too bad. I tapped a few times and it started to break loose, and that's all I needed. You want to stay away from using a pry bar around this area. I've cracked a windshield before using a pry bar. Just by barely touching the edge of the window, it's easy to break. So stay away from pry bars. You can see I was able to bend the blade up, and then it was easy to remove. Now you can see all I have attaching it to this area is the actual rubber tubing from the washer reservoir there. And I'm going to go ahead and recommend that you actually remove the wiper reservoir tubing from the two blades and just get those blades out of the way. I went ahead and removed them all attached. It was a little difficult. I wouldn't recommend that. So just remove the tubing and get those blades out of the way. But you're going to see me remove the whole thing together with the blades kind of hanging on there. So it's way more trouble than it was worth. So at this point now, I'm just going to make sure that everything's breaking free. And what we're going to do is push straight up. So I'm just kind of detaching it from around the hood hinge area here. It takes a little bit of finagling to get it away from the hood itself, and then so I could lift it straight forward. But it wasn't too bad. What is a little more difficult is removing the tubing from the washer reservoir. So I removed the tubing from the reservoir, and I'm going to show you a clear shot of that in a minute. So I could just lift this whole plastic trim with the blades straight up. But it wasn't too easy to get that tubing out, and you're going to need some tubing to replace anything you might break. Let's face it, this is over 20 years old. This tubing is going to snap. Mine snapped in multiple places, so I'm going to show you a picture of the tubing that I bought in a minute. But you can see right in here, I removed this little piece, and that wasn't too bad. This piece came out really easily, but I did break other parts of this tubing. It's just kind of brittle. It's, like I said, over 20 years old. You're going to break something. There's no way you're going to get around that. And there's a whole kit that you can buy. It's pretty cheap on Amazon. I'll show you that in a minute. But I removed this little piece right here, and then I pushed this piece through the firewall here, and that allowed me to push this whole plastic trim along with the wiper blades up. So this is what the tubing looks like that I got from Amazon. I have an affiliate link, and it does help the channel if you purchase it through my link, and it doesn't cost you anything extra at all. So make sure you have this on hand before you start the job. These little connectors worked really well. The tubing wasn't exactly the exact same size, but it worked really well and was able to patch up all the broken parts that I had. The more I messed with it, the more I broke actually. It's just old and brittle, so you definitely want to have a kit handy before you start the job in case you run into any issues. Hopefully you won't have too many broken parts, but when I pulled the blades off, I noticed one of these connectors was snapped off right off the bat, so this really did help. Okay, this is about 23 years worth of debris and stuff that's been collecting underneath that plastic trim, and that little plate right there that you can barely make out is where the window motor is underneath that black plate right there. So you can see that this needs to be cleaned, and that's one of the great things about doing things yourself. You can take the time to actually thoroughly clean this whole area. A regular mechanic does not get paid to clean these areas out. They just brush stuff aside, and then they get to work on the part they're going to replace. But you have the time to thoroughly clean your whole engine bay as you work in a certain area. And I think that's one of the big benefits of doing stuff yourself, is you got time to really take care of your car. Now this area looks nice and cleaned up. It's had 23 years of debris, and I've got all that out of the way. We've got some surprises underneath this little metal plate, but we'll get to that in a minute. But yeah, that's one of the benefits of doing stuff yourself. Okay, now it's time to remove this metal plate. Not bad at all. I've got an extended 10mm socket right here. These are all 10mm nuts and bolts. We have 2 nuts and 3 bolts right here. Piece of cake. Let's go ahead and break all these loose. I think the only thing you need to be careful of is once you get those two nuts close to the window, be very careful. You do not want to tap the edge of this window. I mean, it's very easy to break or crack your window by tapping the edge here. It happened to me, so just be careful not to tap that with your ratchet or with this metal plate, and this thing comes right off. Piece of cake. Okay, before we go any further, I want you to take a look at this yellow dot that's right by that star bit where the wiper blade assembly attaches to the motor. You want to make sure you take a picture of this so when you place this wiper blade assembly back on the motor that it's aligned exactly the way you find it. You can see where that little dot is compared to my wiper blade assembly attachment, and I'm going to put it back just like that. If you don't do it, they won't function correctly when you start them back up, so make sure you take a note of that, where that yellow dot is. Okay, there's 3 points of attachment to get this whole wiper blade assembly with the motor out. I'm going to use the 13mm mountain wrench to actually twist the wiper arm assembly to make it easier to remove from this area, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute. But there's one, here's the second one, and the third one's over by the other wiper blade. So we're going to break these 3 10mm bolts loose to loosen up the whole wiper blade assembly to remove it from this area. Now this piece over here was actually a plastic brace, which I found pretty crazy because, you know, you've got a lot of force on this wiper blade assembly, and you're going to make one of the mounts plastic, and over time, of course, it just got weak and broke. So when you see, after I remove this, you'll see it's just snapped completely off. The good news is the other 2 mounts are metal, and they should be able to handle the task that this plastic part was unable to hold up to over the past 20 something years. It just snapped off. I used an epoxy glue to try to glue this back on. It didn't hold up. I didn't try JB Weld. I think JB Weld would be the only other thing I would try to glue this back on. You don't have to have this piece. It would be great if you could, you know, get it to work with some JB Weld, but I was able to get this thing working with just the other 2 mounts. But yeah, it's unfortunate they used plastic on that bit over there. But, you know, I guess GM didn't think that we were going to keep this car for 20 something years. Okay, you can see I've just broken the second bolt loose right here on this metal framed area, and this is gonna take up the slack of that broken plastic piece. Came off really easily, no problems. And same with the passenger side bolt that's right by the wiper blade assembly area. Easy to access, easy to break loose, not a lot of force involved here. And now that I've got all 3 10mm bolts loose, now we can work on getting this whole wiper blade assembly with the motor attached out of this tight little area right here. We're going to need to actually rotate the whole wiper blade assembly counterclockwise right here. I'm using a mountain wrench. You can use a 13mm socket if you've got one, or a mountain wrench if you've got one. Pay close attention to about how far I'm moving this wiper blade assembly counterclockwise. Get it roughly in this area right here. Once you get it collapsed down about this far, it's going to make it a lot simpler to remove from this area. I mean, much easier than trying to get it out without rotating this wiper arm. You may not be able to do it without rotating the wiper arm. So, you know, you may have to experiment a little bit, but get it close to where I got it, and you should be able to remove this whole assembly. Now, at this point, you can see we don't want to just yank it out because we actually have a electrical harness hooked to the motor, and we do need to detach that before we can remove this whole assembly out of this area. But I'm just going to kind of straighten it up so I can get access to the electrical harness itself. But right about here is where you need to let it rest, and I'm going to point to the harness just right there. So now we can get to the harness, easy access, and detach it. Okay, let's zoom in on the electrical harness area and make it easy to see what's going on here. This is real simple to remove, but there is one piece we'll have to actually cut, and that's that white zip tie right there. And what that does, it just keeps the electrical harness away from the wiper blade assembly so it doesn't get caught up in there while it's rotating and, you know, destroy the harness. So we'll have to cut that, and we'll replace that with a new zip tie when we're all done. no problem there. Just make sure you got some zip ties on hand. And now we're going to detach this electrical harness from the motor itself. Just a flathead screwdriver is all you need. We're going to lift up on this tab and then slowly inch this thing out. Now, just want you to be pretty careful with this electrical harness. It's 23 years old, or however old your car is, 23, 20 years old. It's going to be somewhere in that vicinity. These plastic parts can snap easily. Mine seems to actually be in pretty good shape. It's holding up to a little manipulation, nothing broke, and I was able to pull it out pretty easily. First thing I did notice though is that whole plug was just drenched in water. So there was water all throughout this electrical harness, and that's not something you really want. And I think I kind of figured out what was causing that, and we'll go over that when we go to reassemble it. But we've got one more piece we need to remove, and you're gonna need a pair of needle nose pliers to just push in on this little tab below this arm. It's a little plastic bit that holds the electrical harness secure to this metal area right here, and that's once again just to keep it from getting caught up in the blade assembly while it's rotating. So you squeeze it together with a pair of needle nose. Sorry you can't quite see the end of the tip, but I'll show you when I get it removed. Squeeze it together, then pull down on the harness. It was pretty easy to get out. No problems there. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this loose. And now we can remove the rest of the electrical harness from the wiper blade assembly, and we can get the wiper blade assembly out of the engine bay area. And now we can kind of take a look at what might have caused this whole situation to begin with. So you can see over here, we definitely need to wipe this down, but check this out. This is the culprit right here. There's a drain facing towards the firewall by that little bolt hole right there that will allow fluid to escape and small amounts of debris. But over time, 23 years to be exact, this muck, swamp water, whatever you want to call this, is horrible. It's been sitting in here, and the window washer motor has been bathing in this along with the electrical harness, which caused it to short circuit. Not completely fail, but short circuit. So that is what caused my situation. So we're gonna have to clean this all out, make sure that flap is draining correctly, and then we hopefully won't run into this issue again. So this is what caused my problem. This may or may not be the same issue for your motor assembly, but this is definitely what caused my problem. Okay, well now we're going to go ahead and remove the 13mm bolt from the washer assembly, and I decided to use an impact gun because when I tried to use the ratchet, the whole arm started to move, and I didn't have anybody to help me keep it from moving. So if you have somebody holding the arm, it'll be easier to do with a ratchet, but impact gun made quick work of it, and I thought I could lift this off, but no, I'm going to have to remove 3 star bits. So before I removed the star bits, I decided to use some PB Blaster. It looked like there might be a little bit of rust, and I didn't want to take any chances on stripping these 3 small star bit bolts out. So I went ahead and hit them with PB Blaster, let it soak for about 30 minutes. And I also decided to use a center punch to shock these 3 bolts as well. And you don't have to do this. The PB Blaster should be enough to help you break these loose, but sometimes if you shock a bolt, if you think it's rusty, it will help break it loose. And I happen to have a small center punch, so I just went around and shocked each one of these bolts. And then I got a 1/4 inch driver and use my star bit. And I don't have the exact star bit size, sorry, but just get a star bit set. Before you even start this procedure, make sure you have a star bit set handy. You can order these off Amazon. I'll see if I can find a link for you. But yeah, it made pretty quick work with this 1/4 inch driver here, and I was able to pull each one of these star bit bolts loose with no issues, no stripping at all. So now that I got the 3 nuts and the bolt removed, I thought I'd just be able to lift this right off with a pry bar. Nope, it was stuck on there pretty good. So I whipped out my trusty small ball peen hammer, gave it a couple whacks, and now finally we can remove the wiper blade assembly from the motor itself. And that little plastic tube there is just an air tube, if you're wondering what that is. But yeah, now we've finally got this thing broken free. Okay, next up we're going to remove this little air tube from your old motor. Your new one may or may not have this, but if it does, you will need to reuse this. And you can see I'm using a flathead screwdriver to pull up on it so I don't damage it. It's made of plastic, so it could, damage it, so be careful. And this is designed to help vent off any moisture from the motor, but obviously it's not designed to vent off swamp water and debris like I had. So it was overwhelmed by all the stuff that I had in my engine bay. Okay, I bought a motor from A Premium. I'm not going to recommend these guys. I'm not sponsored by these guys, and I will tell you why in just a second, but it was a perfect fit. So before we tell you why we didn't use it, let's see what's in the box.
What's in the box?
So as far as fitment goes, this thing was spot on. It mounted up perfectly. Even came with a new arm that attached to your wiper blade assembly, so you didn't have to swap that out. But the main problem with this is I could not get it to function correctly as far as the wiper blade movement. It was trying to sweep down instead of upward, like a normal wiper would go across your windshield. It was trying to pull down. I couldn't figure out exactly what I did wrong, but the good news is I was able to repair my old one. I'm going to tell you more about that in a minute. So I could not get this one to work. I haven't contacted A Premium yet, but I'm assuming they'll give me a full refund. So I've got some other options for you here. Okay, here's another option from Amazon. I'll leave a link below. It's from Yamura. It basically looks like about the same and costs about the same as the A Premium. I've never used this before, but you might want to try this one. Also, Parks Geeks has lots of different options once you go onto their platform, all within the same price range or more expensive, and they're usually pretty reliable. You can try A Premium, but I'm just telling you, mine was not functioning correctly, so use at your own risk. Okay, now it's time to attach our new motor to our wiper blade assembly, and I've decided to use the original motor mount that's already attached to my wiper blade assembly. So I'm going to remove this new little motor mount right here with an impact wrench, and then to get that little arm off, I had to use a ball peen to tap it to break it loose, just like we did to get the old motor off. And now that this is off, I can go ahead and just bolt this directly up to my wiper blade assembly. Okay, I'm going to show you the correct orientation to mount your motor to your wiper blade assembly now. We're definitely not going to attach the wiper blade to the motor yet, so I'm going to swing that out of the way in a second. We're going to basically attach the 3 star bit bolts back on to the motor. So we're going to make sure it's lined up in this configuration right here. This is the orientation you want, and we're going to hand start each one of our star bit bolts back in so we don't cross thread anything. We definitely don't want to do that. So make sure you start your bolts in by hand, and then I went ahead and tightened them down moderately with a impact driver. This is a 1/4 inch impact driver, and once I get them semi-tight, I'm going to come back by hand with the star bit and just tighten them as tight as I can get them. I don't have any torque specs for you, so make sure they're just nice and snug, and then we know our motor is now nicely mounted. Okay, all we have left to do is attach the wiper arm to the motor itself, and you're just going to start the bolt by hand. Remember, it's a 13 mil. I'm going to use my 1/2 inch driver and just torque that thing down. You can obviously use a ratchet here if you want, but you'll need somebody to help you hold the wiper arm assembly. So now that it's all attached, we're ready to bolt this baby back into the car. Quick note, if you're wondering why I didn't reattach the breather tube to the new motor, is because the new motor did not come with a mount for the breather tube. So a lot of the newer motors don't have that little mounting area for the breather tube. Okay, before we put it back in the car, let's talk about the free fix I talked about earlier. If your motor is still working, but it sporadically turns on and off and you can't really control it, but it actually still works. I didn't film my old motor when I did this to it because I didn't think it would work, and so I'm going to show you with this new motor. But I removed these 3 Phillips screws and this black plastic housing I was able to pry up and off of the metal part of it here. There is some adhesive holding this thing down to make it waterproof, and you will need to reapply a new adhesive or waterproofing when you put it back together. I've used this stuff right here, black super weather strip adhesive by 3M, works really well. I picked this stuff up at Walmart, or I'll leave a link from Amazon if you want to pick that up. But there is a circuit board inside here once you remove this plastic housing, and it's attached to the coupling there where the electrical harness hooks up right in here, and so that's all attached to the circuit board. So once you remove this plastic piece, you can literally just go in and pry out the circuit board and slide the electrical coupling out of the housing and in its entirety. And once I did that, the whole inside of this thing was wet. The circuit board was also wet. So this thing slid right out right here. That's coupling. It just took a little bit of finagling and I was able to get it out. So once you pull it all apart and you get the circuit board out, you just dry it all off with paper towels. And then I cleaned the inside of this whole housing out because it had some dirt and debris in there from sitting in that muck that we showed you earlier. Dried it all out, dried the circuit board out, put it back together, used the adhesive weather stripping, and then put my 3 bolts back on. And lo and behold, it worked. It was amazing. I had no idea it would work, so I didn't even film it. I just thought it was a last ditch effort because I didn't want to have to wait for a new motor to come back because, you know, we had that problem with this one where it was going in reverse. So it worked, and couldn't believe it. So I didn't even think to film it because I really didn't think it was going to work. So try that. If your motor still works, you might just get lucky like I did and not have to buy a motor at all. But it's 50-50 shot here. You may still have to replace the motor. It just depends on what kind of condition your motor's in. Okay, before we place the wiper assembly back in, I just wanted to show you how clean I was able to get this area, and this will avoid any more issues with swamp water getting into our motor. Your regular mechanic is not going to make it look this good. So once again, this is the benefit of doing things yourself and doing them the right way. I just wanted to show you how clean it can get. And now we're ready to go ahead and place the wiper assembly back in here in a nice cleaned area. So before we put it back in, we're going to reattach the electrical harness because it's very difficult or nearly impossible to do it once it's been put into the vehicle. So we're going to go ahead and plug this thing in first, and it's easy to do. So I'm going to go ahead and reattach it, and then there's that white little push pin right down here that needs to be reattached to the metal plate that we took out earlier. So you can see that little hole. I'm going to go ahead and click that back in, and that was really easy to do, so that popped right in. Okay, and don't forget to add the zip tie. Remember the zip tie that we cut off earlier? We need to reattach that zip tie, and that just makes sure that the electrical harness does not become detached accidentally or be jarred loose somehow. The last thing you want to do is have to tear this all apart just to reattach the harness. So this is more of a safety precaution here to make sure that that electrical harness stays intact. And now we're going to trim the excess and we're ready to reinstall. Okay, good news here is, once again, putting things back together sometimes is easier than taking it apart. And this is the case here. It's easier to slide it back in. Just pay close attention to the wiper arm assembly, the way I've got it positioned right here. We're going to adjust it after we get it in here. So look how I've got it. This seemed to help me out. We're going to go motor first in there. And you can see I kind of stuck the motor in first and it slid right in. I mean, it was insanely easy compared to getting it out. So try this method. You may have to adjust your wiper assembly arm a little bit, move it around a little bit, jiggle it a little bit to get it in. But mine went in much easier than it came out. And now that we've got it in here, we are now ready to reattach it with the 2 10mm bolts. And remember, originally there's 3, but the plastic end over on the other side broke off. So I'm going to go ahead and hand thread this 10mm into the passenger side blade area right over here. And that's a metal attachment, so that's great. And this one right here is metal also. So we've got 2 points of attachment. This one's broken, and I'm not going to worry about that. I put the bolt back in there, but we're not going to do anything with it. 10 mil bolts. So we've got 2 bolts that are still going to hold this whole thing in, and they're in metal on metal. So if we torque it down nice and tight, I think we'll be just fine. That assembly had been working for who knows how long with the broken plastic piece, so I don't think that's going to be an issue. Okay, this is a flashback to when we first opened the cover plate. We're looking at the wiper blade assembly in comparison to that yellow dot right there. You need to make sure that your wiper blade assembly is back in this orientation compared to the yellow dot. If you do not start off in this position, your wiper blades will not function correctly. So make sure that you have it set in this position before we start the wiper blades. Okay, this next step is completely optional. What you're looking at here is a used shower curtain draped over my entire engine bay. So what I'm going to do now is take the Sharpie and mark out an area that's going to cover like this vent area all the way down past the wiper blade assembly area. The whole goal is to cut out a piece of plastic to cover this wiper blade assembly area so we don't reaccumulate leaves and debris and end up with more swamp water underneath our motor. So that's the goal here. It's an experiment. I've been running it for a couple of months and it's definitely worked. So this is, like I said, completely optional, but this is what it looks like after you go ahead and cut away all the excess. You've got this whole area nicely covered. Now we don't want to cover this vent right here, so I'm going to cut that little square out. But this is the goal here, just to cover right along this wiper blade assembly area and to keep anything from reaccumulating underneath the motor here. So you can see that I've got that little yellow dot and the wiper arm lined up perfectly right here. And I didn't show it, but the wiper blades work great. So I didn't show this in the video, wiper blades working again, but everything worked great. So now I've got this covered pretty nicely here, and I've used what's called a butylene, or it's like a tacky tar type substance that keeps this plastic sheet nicely attached to the metal framework, and it's worked out quite well. So you'll now put that metal plate back over the wiper blade assembly area and that black metal plate that we took out earlier, and then we can put the plastic trim back in. It's worked pretty well. It's, like I said, it's completely optional, but I just really didn't want to end up with the same situation with the leaves and debris stuck underneath my wiper blade motor. Got one last tip for you as far as the plastic trim that goes around the bottom of the windshield. If yours is looking old and clapped out like mine was, try some of this back to black trim and plastic restore from Mother's. I'll leave a link below, but this stuff works pretty good. I just rinsed off the whole plastic trim and then sprayed it down and wiped it off. And this stuff actually brought some of the luster back. It looks pretty new compared to what it did before I pulled it off. You know, this thing's 20 something years old, so it really did make it look a lot better. So you might want to try this stuff out if your plastic trim's looking old and beat up. So if this install video helped you out, don't forget to give me a big old fat thumbs up. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. I'll try to get back to you. And until next time, you know what to do. Just keep on repairing.